Pilates teacher, so of course I'm going to ask you to do something, but it's not what you think I'm going to ask you to do. I need you to think about something for me. I want you to picture the person you love most on the planet. Now, I know most of you are thinking, well, I can't choose just one person. There are a couple of people. There's more than one person that I really love. Just put the face of one of them in your head for me. Okay, you've got it? Okay, now here's the question. Would you treat that person's body, if you were responsible for it, exactly the way you treat your own? Would you feed it? Would you rest it? Would you exercise it? Would you protect it exactly the way you do your own? I'm guessing maybe the answer is no. I see some heads shaking no. Here's the next question. Would you speak to that person exactly the way you speak to yourself all the time? And I mean the stuff that goes on here, not the stuff that comes out of here. So we'll get back to that. I want to tell you a little bit about myself first. So I am the sixth of 7 children born into an achieving, loud, noisy, affectionate family. And I don't really remember a day from my childhood when someone outside the family didn't compare me to one of my sisters or my brother. My parents raised us to be strong and independent and successful. And when I was getting ready to graduate from high school, my dad actually sat me down and he said, look, we'll pay for either college or your wedding. Well, I looked at him like he was out of his mind, and I answered exactly the way I was raised to answer him. I said, well, pay for college and I'll pay for my own wedding. I mean, come on. So off I went to college, and 4 years later, I was embarking on my professional journey. In my early 30s, by my early 30s, I was a pretty successful advertising and marketing executive. I was living the life I was raised to live. And in the process of all of that, I was experiencing stress, shall we say. Stress that manifested itself in very interesting ways. I'd get headaches, and it was unpleasant. And then sometimes I'd break out in a rash or some hives, which was a little bit more unpleasant. And then the big thing was that I had these knots right about here on either side. They kind of looked like tumors, and it was from stress, and it's because I held my head, neck, and shoulders like this all the time because I was so stressed out. And I would try and figure out what to do about this stress, and I couldn't really deal with it in any fashion, and I would just kind of ignore it. And around that time, somebody suggested to me that I might want to try Pilates. Well, I'd never heard of Pilates. I had to look the word up. And it looked interesting, and I thought about it. And then on my 32nd birthday, I was given a gift of a Pilates package. Well, the first time that I got on a reformer, which is a piece of apparatus that we actually use in Pilates, I remember all of a sudden, through my whole body, I went, wow, this is for me. So it began. I moved to Denver, and I practiced Pilates. And about a year later, on my birthday, actually, I moved to Washington, D.C. to take a job with a big firm. It was the big job. It was sort of the big kahuna in my career, like the holy grail, if you will. And there wasn't Pilates nearby, but there was a lot of stress. And then on top of that, something that we all experienced in some fashion, there was the Pentagon on fire 4.5 miles from my office. And everything started to change. I hated my life. I was miserable. I wasn't doing what I wanted to do, but I really felt trapped because I didn't feel like I had any talents. I didn't have a calling in life. I was really stuck. Well, as it seems to happen with a lot of us, the universe unstuck me by firing my butt from my job about a week after I got a big raise and a big bonus. They were disbanding the marketing department, and I was out. Well, it took me 10 months to find a job. And having described my successful, achieving family, you can imagine what that did for my ego and for my self-esteem, etc. So in October 2002, I moved to Cincinnati, Ohio to take a position with a Toronto-based ad agency. I threw up immediately after I accepted the job. This wasn't the life that I wanted. But I packed up the dog, and we moved to Cincinnati. And when I arrived in the city, I grabbed some magazines because I didn't know anything about Cincinnati. And I'm paging through one of the magazines, and I see an ad for Pilates studio. And I think, oh, I'm going to be okay. They have Pilates here. So the Sunday night before I started this new job, I got online and I was researching Pilates studios. And as I'm doing all of this, I think, oh, I'll call one of them and leave a message and, hear what they have to say. So I found that one that was interesting, and I dial and I get ready to listen to the message and leave a message back, and it's 10 o'clock at night, I don't know if I mentioned that, and somebody answers the phone. There's this woman, her name's Stacy Sims, and she owned the studio. It was called Pendleton Pilates. Well, an hour later, we were making an appointment for me to come in for a private the next Saturday. That first day that I was with her, Stacy taught me how to breathe. And even though I'd been taking Pilates for years prior, for the very first time, I actually felt my core. I didn't know it, but I found a home. So I started taking Pilates about 4 to 5 times a week. And most weeks, I'll be honest with you, at 8:30 at night after class, I would have to go back to my office. But I was making time, for the first time in my grown-up life, I was making time for something that was important to me other than work. And probably because of that, I started to thrive a little bit, and my body started to change. And I would go into Pilates class, and these interesting things would happen. My teachers were trying to get me to focus on 5 or 10 things at one time, and there wasn't room in my brain for anything else. And that was a new experience for me. And I would start to have what I now refer to as these light bulb moments in my body. You know how most people, you probably have light bulbs go off in your head, right? I have light bulbs go off in my body. And I think the first one of these actually happened. I was in a class, and I was on a reformer, and my arms were in straps, and my legs were up in a tabletop position, and I was squeezing a ball in between my inner thighs. And as I think about it now, if they had asked me to try and balance a quarter on my nose, I probably would have tried. So I'm in this position, and I'm trying to breathe, and I'm trying to pay attention, I'm trying to focus and be in the moment, and all of this stuff I wasn't really that good at. And all of a sudden, I noticed that my entire body is shaking and trembling. Like I can see my little toes, maybe like they are right now. Anyway, so my whole body's shaking, and I think to myself, oh dear God, what now? Now I've developed some kind of palsy. What am I going to do about this? And I came out of the position, and the shaking had stopped. Turns out, for the very first time, I was as deeply connected to my core as I possibly could be. Some of my clients are in the back of the room, and I learned then, for the first time, you can't fake the shake. I always say that to them. I know you're faking. You can't fake the shake. So another one of these light bulb moments happened in my friend Kate's class. We were in the middle of about 1 million of these excruciating, horrible, thing I hated most, leg extensions and leg lifts. And I remember partway through it thinking to myself, if she makes me do one more of these things, I swear I'm going to rip my leg off and beat her to death with it. I mean, I was one of those girls, and some of my clients have this. I was a hip flexor girl. Actually, it was my right hip flexor. And my hip flexor was screeching in my ears. It was as if the volume turned up louder than I could be on my best day. And it was screaming at me. And I thought, my leg is just going to pop off onto the floor. And all of a sudden, in the middle of this screeching, I heard something else. It was almost like there was a whisper going on. And I thought, oh, that doesn't really hurt that much. I'm going to listen to that instead. And so I started to try and focus on this whisper that was somewhere kind of right around here. And every time we did that ridiculous, excruciating, horrible single leg work, I would just try and find that whisper and focus on that. And after a little while, I realized one day that I couldn't hear the screeching of my hip flexor anymore. All I could hear was my core. Turns out I was onto something. So around that time, I was going back and forth to Toronto about 4 days every other week in order to shoot television commercials for my agency. And I really loved Pilates, and I wanted to be better at it. And so I spoke to Stacy, the studio owner, about learning how to teach. I wanted to go through a teacher training program. But I was really worried that I'd be awful at it. And so I sat down with Stacy, we went out for dinner, and I said, look, here's the thing. If I suck at this, you need to tell me, because there is nothing worse than being in a class with a really bad instructor. And she looked at me and she started to laugh, and she said, well, Marcia, first of all, if you suck, I'm not going to let you teach for me. But second of all, you're not going to suck. Well, I didn't want to be a Pilates teacher. That wasn't the plan. I wanted to, as I said, I wanted to be able to teach myself when I was on the road, but I also figured that I'd work for Stacy a couple of hours a week in exchange for free Pilates. You know, girls got to do what a girl's got to do. And so throughout all of that, I'm thinking, you know, Pilates is my joy. This is the thing that I love most on the planet. And if I actually get into this teaching thing, what if I lose that? You know, when I'm in Pilates, I'm my best self. I'm the person I want to be. What if I can't get that out of teaching? Well, as it turns out, if I didn't get at least that, I got more from teaching. I can't explain to you how much I loved teaching Pilates, how much I loved sharing it with other people. And I would get in the moment, and I'd be in other people's bodies, and I'd be thinking about maybe 100 things versus the 10 that I had to think about when I was working on my own. It was kind of like a drug, and I totally didn't suck. And so I asked Stacy to add classes on the weekends when I was available to teach, and I started teaching on the weekends, and I got better at it. And during that year, I called it the year of teaching with a net, I practiced probably as much Pilates as I taught. And I started to have to really pay attention to myself. And it wasn't just paying attention to my body, it was paying attention to my spirit and to my heart. And I had to recognize that I was really unhappy. I was living a life I didn't want to live. And then I had to have the guts to decide what it was that I needed and go and seek it out. That time period, I had a card up on my desk at work, and it said, "Leap and the net will appear." And it's sort of become one of my mantras. And so in 2004, I leapt, and I left my marketing and advertising career, and I began teaching Pilates full time. And as I did that, I started to really understand who I was and what I wanted. So I started listening to myself, and I started to have these experiences where it felt like I had it. I got it. I understood, and I was listening, and I had it all down, and then something would happen, and it would knock me over. And I would realize I wasn't really listening. I wasn't really paying attention. About 3 years ago, I finally figured it out. I woke up on my 42nd birthday, and I was in love with myself. I was happy, and I was finally listening to me. So now I know that if I listen to my body and my heart and my soul, it tells me right from wrong. It tells me what to do. I can follow my instincts, and I know how to proceed, and I thrive. And if I don't listen, something inside me screeches. So 4 years ago, if you asked me if I could picture the person I love most, do I take care of my own body the way that I would take care of them? The answer would have been no way. Today, you bet. Thanks.